Hi, I'm Han Brown, the host of the Boomer Living broadcast. Navigating the challenges of aging can be difficult, and it's hard to know where to turn for help. The baby boomer generation is aging, and they are facing a host of unique challenges, including senior health care, dementia, Parkinson's, caregiving, technology adoption, affordable senior living options, and financial insecurity. The Boomer Living broadcast is here to help. We provide accurate and up to date information on all of these topics so that baby boomers and their loved ones can make informed decisions about their future. We also offer a wide range of resources and support to help baby boomers and their families through every stage of their journey. So I hope that you find the conversation informative and helpful. And please join the conversation and ask questions. Also, please check out our newly launched platform, Senior Care System. It's an all-in-one sales and marketing platform for individuals and businesses that provide care for the aging population. Senior Care System, one app to replace them all. So today's topic is the Great Resignation, unpaid childcare, and flexible schedules. The Great Resignation has been a hot topic lately, with many people debating its pros and cons. While some see it as a way to improve their work life balance, others worry about the impact it could have on their career. But what is the Great Resignation and why is it so controversial? Well, the Great Resignation is when someone voluntarily leaves their job, usually without another job lined up. They do this in order to focus on other areas of their life, such as their family or their personal health. While this may seem like a good idea in theory, there are some potential downsides. For example, leaving your job without another one lined up can be a risky move financially. And if you are in a highly competitive field, taking time off could put you at a disadvantage when you try to re-enter the workforce. The term sandwich generation is used to describe a group of people who are sandwiched between the demands of taking care of their aging parents while also caring for their own children. Well, this can be a difficult juggling act, and employers need to be understanding and accommodating of this demographic. Employees in the sandwich generation may need more flexible working schedules in order to be able to meet the demands of caring both parents and children. They may also need more time off or different types of benefits, such as elder care benefits. By understanding the needs of employees in the sandwich generation, employers can create a more supportive and productive work environment. So today, my guest is Julie Viola. She's known as a catalyst of healthcare strategies and go-to-market execution in health tech field. Her ability to connect ideas and people results in strategies that drive brand preference, successful solution launches, and campaigns of impact. She joins me today to discuss the sandwich generation and what companies need to know about this demographic as it relates to working schedules and benefits. So, Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Hi. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. And thank you so much for joining me today. So where are you calling from? And can you share with us a little bit about yourself personally and professionally?
Sure. I'm calling in from the Boston area, so on the East Coast of the United States. And I have a young family. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old. And then, as you mentioned, I'm one of the sandwich generation members of our society. I also have 2 wonderful parents in their late 70s. My mom is unfortunately diagnosed with dementia, and my father is her full-time caregiver. So that's the personal side. Professionally, I have been in the health tech field for almost 20 years. Just recently launched my own consulting firm called Cody Health Ventures. But prior to that, did a lot of work in healthcare informatics, virtual care, population health, and a number of really fun and exciting technologies in the healthcare space. So really happy to be here and excited for our dialogue.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm honored to have you here, and I look forward to this conversation of very important topic. So thank you.
Absolutely.
So, in the wake of the Great Resignation, a lot of people are talking about the need for more flexible schedules. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that first and foremost, there's no one size fits all, I'll say. And I read a great article with Forbes, and they tied back the 9 to 5 workday really to the assembly line. And so, that type of work is still very much so needed. And I think some of the service industries, flexibility is going to be difficult, a tough nut to crack, as you would say. But I think, in some of the other spaces, I know for myself, what I found with my team working in the past few years is we established some flexibility. And I think one of the things that came across that I would say as a best practice was agreeing on what were negotiable hours and what had to happen. So, for example, I had a team that was primarily based in the Boston area, but we had some folks out of town. And the flexibility that we were able to find was we're going to do one together day. So, one day that we're all saying we can make this happen. On the flip side, I had some folks that had young children that needed to start maybe a little bit later because of drop off and pickup, and doing a tag team with a spouse. And so the way that I used to say it was, let's figure out what has to happen and then where there can be flexibility. I think the second piece is not everyone's the same. I will tell
Mhm.
you that if you call me first thing in the morning, I'm really pretty sharp. I love talking in the morning hours. Whereas in the afternoon, that's kind of my time to let my brain, kind of move a little bit more fluidly, be maybe a bit more creative and less specific. But I had other folks that were great in the afternoon, and so just understanding what those norms are on any team has been really helpful. And I think from an employer standpoint, taking it from the team to the hierarchy, just being trusting your people, trusting your
Mhm.
leadership team to find what's excuse me, find what's best, and then I found that by giving that type of flexibility to my team and honestly to myself, we were better for it.
That's great. Do you think it's important that both men and women to have flexible working hours?
Absolutely. I think that's a really easy one, right?
Mhm.
This isn't about gender. I think this is really about whatever it takes to make the workforce as great as possible. And then also on the other side, at home, everyone has a different role to play, and whether you're a man or a woman or what have you, it shouldn't make a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, and that's what makes it work in home life is sharing those responsibilities. It's not about gender. It's what you can do best with your available time, and whether it's being at home taking care of the kids or taking them to practice or being a coach at the team. Um,
Right.
it's life decisions that you make, and you do the best that you can for your family now and in the future. So
Agreed.
I agree with that. So now, how do you think we can make it easier for parents to manage work, childcare, and elder care?
Yeah, I mean, I think that flexibility is the key, and like I said, I think coming to a commitment, as an organization is really important. And first, you have to carve out the time. I would say that, secondarily, I don't think any employer or any team or necessarily a manager comes into work trying to create a blockade. I think what happens is that they don't know, they don't know. So, for me personally, I have like I said, a 4 and a 6 year old. So I understand the demands of childcare because I'm in it. So when I've had employees with young children, I can understand what they're going through and maybe help them navigate it. I think the second piece though is that um, from a benefits standpoint, an employer, they're going to benchmark, right? So, for example, I've worked at companies that have had unlimited sick time. And so people stop actually inputting the sick time, even though they are asked to track it. And so I would always say if you need to take 2 hours to go to a doctor's appointment or you're not feeling well for an afternoon, still put it in the system so that we have a benchmark so that if it
Mhm.
ever is questioned, do we really need to have this benefit? That the metrics are there so that they understand what to pull and push more. I think the second piece is it's really easy whether you're going to a employee town hall or you're one-on-one with an HR looking for feedback. It's easy to just kind of roll over and say it's fine. Don't say that. Advocate. And if you know of other people that are dealing with things that you're not dealing with and you see that as a roadblock, you have to speak up. So, the best thing I can say is I've managed through both, obviously, um, childcare and going on maternity leave. And when I had my children, I had probably one of the best managers I've ever worked for. And he said to me, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And
Mhm.
so when I came back to work, at 2 o'clock, he would say, go home. I know that in 3 months, when you're in more of a routine, I'm going to get 150% of you. It's okay. You don't have to work 9 to 5. I'm not tracking your number of hours at your desk. And he realized that by me having that extra time with my young children, that I was a better employee because number one, I was more loyal. But number two, I was more happy. And I
Mhm.
also, again, we work in a mobile environment and a remote environment. So, after the kids go to bed, I don't mind plugging in and doing maybe an hour of work later at night. That's the kind of flexibility that mattered to me, but it might not be the same for everyone else. And then I think just the last piece, you mentioned elder care. I just
Mhm.
don't think people have thought through it. And, Han, you and I had a chance to speak really quickly before we went live. And if you're not in that space, it's really hard to imagine it. And so sometimes if you have an HR department that is just not well versed or hasn't had the personal experience, they may not know to even offer it, or they might offer something that is fairly vanilla. And so they need feedback. And so I would just say that be outspoken, be creative, think outside the box and what you need, and be that linchpin, so to speak, to get things moving.
Absolutely. So we talk about elder care and the sandwich generation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a it's a demographic that needs more support, and you and I are in this demographic. With me, my kids
Mm-hmm.
are adult now, 25, 22, and 20. So what do you think employers need to understand about this demographic as it relates to working schedules and benefits? I know we cover some, but what are some key
Mm-hmm.
points that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I would say, a couple of things that maybe just to bring to the forefront, and Han, you might have even more to add. Um, most insurance, for example, doesn't necessarily cover elder care. So that's something that I discovered with my parents. So as I mentioned, my mom has dementia, and she was diagnosed more than 4 years ago. And I think arguably we probably knew maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And nobody can give you a timetable of what that looks like. There's predictions of when things will plateau, when things will decline, but there's no certainty. And so, one of the things that's been incredibly helpful is having companion care to
Hmm.
give my father, who's the primary caretaker, a break. And so, what has happened is, you know, there might be different agencies charge different amounts, but maybe it's between $25 and $35 an hour. That can add up. And so it feels reasonable when you're just doing 10 hours at the beginning. But what happens when that person needs really and truly full-time care, or 40 hours a week, or even 25 hours a week? There are simply people that can't afford that. Or, we live in a society where we part of our life management, or our retirement planning, is so that we don't go bankrupt from caretaking at the end of our lives. And so I think that's another thing. I think employers just need to be educated on the burden that feels. And I'll give you a real example. I was in a role that I was going for a new role, had been given the green light. Julie, you're the candidate, and there was a pay increase, and it lingered and it lingered and it lingered. And what that meant for me was that pay increase was the difference between me being able to pay for my parents having 10 or 15 hours extra and not. And
Hmm.
so the ability to move fast and to offer that kind of either pay increase through just merit, those things matter to people that are in this generation, and speed and clarity on benefits and pay is really important, because you might be in a position, where cost is a barrier to care. I'm lucky that my parents have planned very well, but not everyone's in that situation. And it creates a tremendous amount of stress on the employee. And so again, it comes back to what I had mentioned about the manager that I had that was incredibly supportive. What happens to employees when they feel supported and they understand the benefits that are around them? They're going to soar. They're going to do great
Hmm.
work for the company. And so put those support structures in place so that people can feel that way. I think the second piece that's a little bit harder to rationalize or understand if you haven't been in it. I'll say that you mentioned mental health in your introduction, Han, and I think that's really important. One of the pieces that's a little bit more complex in elder care versus, I'll say, childcare, not to say that doesn't happen with childcare, is my mom's going through dementia. You mentioned Parkinson's. There's some other disease states that can be very, I'll say, cruel. And
Mm-hmm.
so when my mom was diagnosed with dementia, that was difficult, but it's been a slow progress. My dad's taking care of my mother, and when I went to take care of my mom, when my dad had a cardiac event, I was that person. That's incredibly stressful because now all of a sudden it's 24/7, right? But more importantly, when my mom realized that, when I realized my mom no longer knew who I was,
Mm-hmm.
that point for anyone that's a caretaker of anyone with any kind of cognitive decline, that's your grief point, right? That's when I always say that that's the day that I lost my mother. But the crazy thing is, your benefits aren't set up that way. So the next day you go back to work. And are you whole? And is the support structure there? No. And so then I think the second piece is, if I took time off to I'll say grieve and have that time, there's two options when you look at it more of a traditional, I'll say, employer benefits plan. Take, vacation time, take an unpaid leave, or take some kind of a short-term disability if that is something that would qualify. But then if you think about it, we've mentioned as the sandwich generation. Am I willing to take a week off to grieve? But then in the summertime, does that mean that I can't go to the beach with my kids as much as I'd like to? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the push and pull that so many people are in right now. And it's hard because, should it all fall on the employers? Should there be more government support? Should it be employee driven and employee led? I don't have the answers. This is what we have to figure out as a society that makes this so complex and fragile to some degree, because there's a lot of emotions with it. And I think the same thing would fall with parents who have children that it doesn't go according to plan.
Yeah.
There's a complexity. There's some sadness. There's some horrible things that happen. There's a need for more nimbleness in some of these benefit packages, so that we're not making every single employee have the full strength package, but there's the flexibility to turn that on without having to put people through some kind of obstacle course to get there.
Mm-hmm. And COVID has certainly been a great revealer with the great
Yes.
resignation and all the complexities and losses in everyone's lives. So thank you. Thank you for that. I'm with you.
I know.
um, yeah. So do you think the trend of parents quitting their jobs to take on unpaid childcare will continue?
I do. And I think the reason I think that is for a couple of reasons, and it's not all, I'll say, doom and gloom. I think people have found that there are so many opportunities for flexibility now, that if you're an employer and you're not offering flexibility, you're going to lose people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the second piece is, we've seen it ourselves. Like right now, I'm in a family room that is my in-law apartment. My in-laws live with us part-time, and so I think a trend of more multi-generational housing is coming back to make ends meet. So that if you have to move to more of a part-time schedule versus a full-time schedule, that you have the financial foundation to be able to do that. I also think that there's been some, really great work with some employers in terms of job sharing. I know my spouse at her company, they do a lot of job sharing, and that's great. So there's, I'll say a baton pass. I'll do 3 days, you do 2 days, but we're a whole person when it comes to the payroll.
Mm-hmm.
That might happen. And then I think also people have found, like myself, working for yourself, I can still maximize 40 hours, but I have the flexibility to work at the hours that I can, so that I can spend some of the daytime either with my children or with my parents.
Mm-hmm. Very true. I love the idea of flexibility because you likely to end up working more than 100%. You likely to give 100+% of yourself
Yeah,
because in all aspects of your life, it's fulfilled. You're more available to perform and exceed expectations. So
agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Now, how do you feel about the trend of young professionals delaying parenthood until they can have more flexible work schedule? What do you think about that?
I think it's hard. I think anytime that your employment is dictating your personal choices, that's really difficult.
Hmm.
I've heard of a lot of the tech companies, especially out in Silicon Valley, doing creative things like paying for eggs to be frozen, so that you have more viability, so you can delay later.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's always. I'm going to stick away from a very political topic. I think it's tricky when employers get really tied up into your reproductive rights.
Yeah.
Um, right, whether it's choosing to when you have children or anything else that for that matter, it's just a slippery slope. And I went to a conference earlier this year, and there was a great speaker who talked about the trend right now is you're not seeing a lot of people stay at the same employer for more than 2 or 3 years. And if you think about family planning, that's typically not a quick decision. And so I think there needs to be a way to, I'll say, untether the decisions around that and your employer. What a strange concept, but it's something that we've all been embedded in with, for so long. But I hope that trend, I don't want to say changes for the reason that if people want to have children later in life, I know I did. I had my kids at 36 and 37. But that was a personal choice that I made, or that we made. I hope that people don't do that because of their jobs.
Yeah. It's very personal, right? Whether to stay home, to work part-time, you really need to have the infrastructure of support at home and at your work. And then, of course, the flexibility of your children adapting when you're not at home. Is it with another significant other? Is it with a grandma? Or is it a daycare? I mean, those are major choices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it's a privilege. I mean, I started my career in the service industry. I worked as a pastry chef. I worked in the restaurant business. I was a manager. You hustle, and those
Hmm.
businesses and those service industries are so important. And you don't have the option to necessarily work from home. You're needed out there, and so that
Hmm.
flexibility is there. And then when you start thinking about having a family in that business, most people choose to leave that business and go into something where there is more flexibility. And um, those are life choices that you have to make as a family.
Hmm. Hmm. So I know you touched on this a little bit, but what do you think is the biggest challenge to achieving a better work life balance?
I think we have to kind of start over, almost erase the past. I think what I have found in my conversations with friends who are business owners or other people leaders at different companies is that if we have the 9 to 5 workday as our beachhead, then anyone that's not doing that is going to be an outlier. And that's not an easy role to play. I personally never minded being an outlier, but that's not for everyone.
Hmm.
And so you have to almost, something that I found, I worked with a team that was really incredible. And it was led by somebody in the Netherlands. And what he did is we focused on milestones, not on meetings.
Mm.
Um, and I love that. And so we did something called daily management, where every day we committed to each other um, that we had something that we were working on and we had a deliverable date. Now, if I needed to work on those things at different hours to get those things done, great. Now, we never talked about flexible work days or any of the more formal things that you and I are talking about right now. But when I look back on that time, I had flexibility in the way that I thought and the way I scheduled my meetings, and I have never felt more successful in a work day during than I did during that time. And so, I think each company is going to be different. Like I said, each industry is going to be different. Each industry is going to have different amounts of flexibility that they can manage through. But I think any employee that feels like an outlier or that they're an exception, that's not setting them up to thrive.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of companies are starting to look at some of these things, like I said, around milestones and building objectives and clarity in what we would call our performance review or an annual plan around those things. I think that's honestly why a lot of people have moved into more of a consultant basis. We need you to finish this deliverable by this date.
Hmm.
Um, and what do you need to do to get that
To
done?
get there. Yeah. I
Yeah.
love it. No, I love that principle because at the end of the day, it's about your productivity and meeting companies' objectives, right? And it's
Yep.
about delivering in a timely fashion and meeting your goals, whether it's in a 2 hour or 10 hour span. Hey, get it done
Yeah.
timely, and move on to the next objective and help your company grow and mutually. So
Right.
I love that philosophy. Now, why do you think that more employers don't offer paid childcare?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and it kind of comes back to the gender piece that you mentioned at the beginning. I know I don't know the answer. It's not my area of expertise, but I'll say just really quickly, I think it comes back to loyalty and setting up any kind of benefit to keep your employees. If you're not offering those types of things to your employees, they're going to leave. And I think,
Mhm.
you mentioned the great resignation. What is it? Why is it happening? It's happening because we've reset expectations as a culture. I always say to my team, whenever I make a big change or anytime I've made a big change in my life, what are my non-negotiables? And is if I'm getting ready to have if I'm an employee and I'm getting ready to have a family, I've talked about that, and that's something that I want to do, then I'm going to look for a company that has a great benefits package. If I'm at a company that doesn't have one, I might be looking to leave. And I think it's really that simple. And again, just that clarity on what are my non-negotiables, and what do I need to be successful.
Hmm. Hmm. Hey, I want to acknowledge our guests. Okay.
Hmm.
Hi, Kay. JK, I appreciate you participating. Hey, Michael Mann. Hello. I appreciate you being here. Um, Hi, Patty. Patty Sharon. Thank you for being here. Okay, so hey, why don't you acknowledge Kay and Michael and Patty? Go ahead, Julie. Can you see their
Yeah,
comments?
I can, and I love it. I mean, I think the biggest thing is everyone saying, flexibility is key. Need for the support systems. I love what Kay you mentioned around, the need for insurance and benefit support, the needs of the caregiver, mental and emotional health. Fully agree. And I think one of the things to keep in mind that Kay you referenced in the chat is if we don't set up this infrastructure either through the employer or through government programs, then it falls to the community safety net. And I think those are the things that, you know, there's some parts of that are great, where you have just bootstrapping and people chipping in to help their neighbor. That's a core tenet of just great neighborly behavior. But I think on the other side, it creates a burden. I always said, how many of you have seen either on a Facebook, Instagram, or some kind of a post about somebody who was in some kind of an accident and they're doing a GoFundMe to pay for their expenses? That's really hard. And it just
Hmm.
puts more pressure on the caregiver rather than fixing the root cause. And so I love your comment, Kay. Those are really important. So thank you for everyone's feedback. And again, let's definitely figure out this flexibility piece for caregiving of all kinds, whether it's children or elders or otherwise.
Hmm. Hey, Michael Mann. Thanks for participating.
Yes.
Um, Patty. Let's see what Patty has to say. We desperately need insurance benefits that support the needs of caregiver, mental and emotional health, communities of support, financial management, patient care advocates, respite care. Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, Tracy, how are you? Thank you so much. Thanks for participating, Tracy, and I look forward to talking to you. You want to address Michael Mann's comment here?
Which we're on the 9 to 5.
The we need to get away from the 95. Yeah.
Yeah, and Michael and I have been communicating as well. We went to school together,
Oh.
so he's a good friend of mine, and we've been doing a lot of research together, which has been great. And this is something we both care passionately about, and I'm so happy to hear him reemphasize that. It's so good, and yeah, I think that's really important. And again, there's some industries, I don't want to be insensitive to some of the businesses that simply cannot change that. But I think when possible and where it is, that needs to just change. Because like I said, that outlier mentality is just horrible for an employee feeling successful. We've all been there. If
Mhm.
you've been in any kind of a work environment, anyone that gets an exception is immediately discredited. And that just shouldn't happen.
Right.
Because if you don't want to trade spots with that person, more than likely, with what they're dealing with. At the same time, I understand when we live in a capitalistic society, when there's bonuses or increases or whatever those things might be at stake, you don't want to feel like somebody has an upper hand over you or they've been given an exception. And that's why I say we have to normalize this a bit, and get away from that. And if it's through benefits, like I love what Patty said about respite care, that's huge. Let somebody have that time to care for themselves. Um, and it's up to the employers if things feel like they're being taken advantage of or they're not being taken advantage of enough. Then they have to take the initiative and empower their HR teams and their benefit teams to go out and find the right ones. And that starts at the top, and that just takes great leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, we need to remove the barrier where the employee has to make that tough decision, but then
Mm-hmm.
often you feel less than. Why is it
Right.
less than to take care of a loved one? You know,
Agreed.
whether it's
Agreed.
whether it's dementia, whatever condition, but why do we feel less as a human being?
Right.
We should we should
It's a
somehow
great
change
point.
that paradigm to be it's an honor. It's a privilege to be available and have the option to make that decision to care for your loved one. But I tell you, I felt that way. It's wrong. I don't feel that way now, but we need to remove that barrier that it's an honor, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what, Hon? I love that, and that's something actually that Michael Mann and I have said a lot about that pride. And I think as a United States culture, um, the the treatment of elders is maybe not. We've gotten away from where we used to be.
Hmm.
I grew up in a very Italian Catholic household. And so I was used to being around aging parents and aging grandparents. My mom took care of both of her parents when they went through their role with dementia. My father and my mother took care of both of his parents that went through cancer. That was just innate to who we were. It
Hmm.
just doesn't happen as easily. And I think the piece you mentioned on honor is really important. And I think what's one of the things that I was very intentional when I left my corporate job, and went into this new space that I'm in. I've been very public about it because I want to start to normalize it. It's
Hmm.
not, to your point, it's not something that you should step away from. This is a job. This is a
Hmm.
role. This is something I'm very proud to be able to do. I actually wish I could do more.
Hmm.
It's been something that an eye-opening experience. You are so used to being in a corporate environment where you're pulled in a million meetings in a million directions, and then you move into this, and you might not be as needed as you thought you might be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that component of how we treat employees or people in this part of their journey is really important. I think the Archangels group has done some really great work around this. If you're not aware of them, please look into them. I think they do a really great job on coaching people on how to normalize that. I personally went through a career design fellowship to help identify what I'm going to do in this more fluid part of my career. It's not something that should be ashamed of or step away. It's an important part of who I am.
Hmm.
Um, and I will tell you, Han, the greatest thing is when I made the announcement that I was leaving my corporate job to do something a little bit different and take part in my parents' care. The
Hmm.
outpouring of support has been truly humbling.
Hmm.
Because we've said this before. You join a club that you didn't necessarily want to be a part of,
Right.
but it's a really supportive club when you're in this space.
It is. It is. Thank you. Thank you so much. Hey, Michael Mann. Well, bless you. He says that it's been an honor to fill in the gaps to take care of your dad and your mom. So that's great.
Yes.
I feel the same way. It's a tough decision. It is an honor, but let's face it, it's tiring. It's sad to see the decline, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
make the adaptation at home. Um, it's all encompassing. But it's and I love the fact that you said that we need to normalize these kind of conversations, because if you haven't experienced this, you will likely you will.
Yes.
And the more that we have these kind of conversations, I hope that will inspire employers and employees, situations like this, to be better prepared and provide better support. And that when you do make a decision like this, just to know that you're not alone. Many
Hmm.
are going through it, and perhaps we can offer, you know, a helping hand and that inspiration that it is a blessing, regardless of how tiring and declining it is.
Hmm.
It's good to be there.
Agreed. And Han, I loved what you said at the beginning around the reentry. So when somebody, so to speak, off, you know, exits off of the off ramp into a different area of their life, how do we make it great for them to onboard back seamlessly? I think that's something we have to figure out as well. And I don't have a solution for it fully, but I think it's an important piece to bring up.
Yeah, re-entering the workforce. That's
Hmm.
that's another topic that we can explore deeply, and we need to normalize those type of conversations now, because there's going to be a lot of people like us making these tough
Hmm.
decisions. So
Agreed.
let's say, what advice would you give to someone who wants to achieve a better work-life balance and is struggling right now because they just made a decision to leave work and at home taking care of their loved one?
Yeah, I would say, I think I mentioned this earlier. I think the best thing that people can do is you need to take time to assess a couple of things. One, what is your risk profile? How much risk can you take on in terms of leaving a job for unpaid caregiving? I think the second thing is really understanding your goals. What are your personal goals? What are your professional goals? And what are your non-negotiables? So I'll give you an example. When I made the decision, my non-negotiable was my parents. I'm adopted. My parents have been incredible to me. They have stood by me through every high and low. And so my non negotiable was I'm going to be there for them during this phase, even if it's really difficult for me, because it's really hard to watch your parents regress.
Hmm.
It's not something I would say lightly. So that was a non negotiable. I think the second piece, though, was I wanted to make sure that I could be in the right mind frame or mindset with my young children so that they weren't scared of this process. And so taking time for them as well was really important. I think the next piece was, when I talked to my spouse and, other family members and other really close friends, taking time for me is really important. And that ranged from, um, having the right setup for me to have my alone time, but then also what support systems do I need? Do I need to talk to somebody? All these different things, but have that list of your goals clear. The last piece I would say is know your strengths. I took you can do a number of online tests and quizzes. The 5 strengths, I think it's called, is wonderful. And so your strengths, play to them. I understand that I'm a storyteller and a connector. So I'm trying to find ways to expedite that. I'm really great at strategy. So one of the things that I've been doing is working with other companies on a part-time basis, like I said, as a consultant. And so I'm making sure that I'm talking about the strengths that I have so that when I'm working for them, I can maximize my time with them. And so that clarity is really important. So when somebody says, Julie, how can I help you? I can answer them. And I'm
Hmm.
not just saying, geez, I don't know, I'm in this really tough spot or
Yeah.
it's a tricky time. I can answer them. And so just be thoughtful. I think the last piece is there's a lot of really great courses out there for these different changes in time. So like I said, I took a career design fellowship through my alumni group at my university. $250. It was a great use of money, and it just gave me some of the tools that I'm talking about. But if you're not into something more formal like that, there's books at the library. I would say Strength Finder again is a great way to figure out who you are and what you're good at. so that if you are making a change, that you know where you're going to succeed and your career is still going to excel no matter what pivots you make.
Hmm. Very true. I like your suggestion. Come up with a plan, your non-negotiables, what your strengths are, and because it gives you something more absolute to march to, right?
Yes.
Not an easy thing to do, but it's necessary. I try to have that plan, and it gives you a direction on, hey, you know what? Reminding of myself, hey, it was the right decision. A tough one ahead, but you're making the
Mm-hmm.
right decisions. And along the way, what are your strengths? What can you do to add value, not only at home, but other means? And somehow find that inner peace that I'm in a good place. As
Yes,
difficult as it has been, I am blessed to be in this place.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
So I want to acknowledge J.K. Coughlin. We need to change the narrative about being a family caregiver in this culture. I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
fully agree.
So let's talk about what's ahead for the future of caregiving. Um, you know, what challenges do you see in the caregiving space as far as innovation, technology? What's your take?
I think there's a lot to be excited about, and there's a lot to be weary of, and it's finding that balance. I would say, starting on the positive, I think we're this, like you said, COVID was a great revealer, and it's starting to unearth a lot of things, whether it's inequities, because that's a huge piece that we haven't even covered yet today. I think the second thing is that the speed of innovation right now is so exciting. We just have to harness it towards this area. I think one of the pieces that Michael Mann and I have talked about is there's so many wearable companies. Do we really need this many wearable companies?
Mhm.
Because there a lot of them are doing the same things.
Right.
But when you look at it, there's still great things about that, right? Wearables are needed for certain condition types, and they're delivering really great results. I think the reason that we're seeing so many of them, though, is because of reimbursement. And all of the startups and a number of different companies, they're going to follow the money. And so I think, getting back to, what we spoke about in the beginning of the podcast is how do we bring these needs to life so that we can change policy and demands that are coming from the employer, more of a grassroots acknowledgement of what's needed? Because then if we can change the reimbursements, then the big tech and other companies will follow with innovation. I think the second piece is that there's some really great, not necessarily companies or a specific piece of technology, but just ways of working. And I'll give you a great example. The trend of community paramedicine has been happening for over a decade. I've been following this. If you think about it, we talked about the community safety net, or if I think about some of the comments that have come up in the chat around the community support system, we need to figure out how to harness that. And community paramedicine, it's taking firefighters, paramedics, EMTs in your local community, and they know where the vulnerable populations are. And so whether that's going over for a half an hour to just check on that person that's lonely, that is going to call 911 just to have somebody show up and say hi to them, that's a value. Or if it's somebody that just doesn't feel safe or comfortable or confident taking a walk around the block because they're unsteady and somebody can go and walk with them, that's huge. And those are little things that can help. I think just, this might be a bit futuristic, Han, but I think there's some things happening even in like robotics that are really cool. Being in Massachusetts, we're really close to a lot of the innovation down in Cambridge. And if you watch the MIT robotics lab, they're starting to become more dexterous with their hands, these
Mhm.
robots. And so could that be something that could happen in the next decade? I don't know. Even just somebody coming in and putting groceries away for somebody, or a robot being able to do that. I think that's maybe some of the more fun side of innovation that could be coming down the pike. But I do think that more on a more practical level, we have to figure out what's really helpful. And this is something that Michael and I have talked about. How do you help somebody bathe? A wearable is not going to
Yeah.
do that. right? That's not going to be done through an iPad. That's the biggest challenge I know my father has. It's, he has no problem making food, or if I can't get to them, I can DoorDash them a pizza. I can DoorDash them a salad, smoothies, right? But getting hygiene taken care of without having to have an outside provider come in all the time, that's the stuff that we have to figure out.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Back to your point about wearables, and many, you know, perform the same way. And I see a lot of technologies coming out aside from wearables. So how do you synchronize and I guess more in a unified fashion, so there's not, too many of one type of technologies coming out and not enough of the other, just like you described, the bathing and something that's a bit more private that
mhm.
that they all going to need some help. So, and I
Yeah,
don't
and
know, I don't know if robots. I mean, there's a lot of positive things that are coming out with robotics, absolutely, but I'm not sure if they're the right solutions for what you and I just talked about. In the
agreed,
privacy of
agreed.
bathing and so forth. And I know cameras and to prevent falls and things of that nature was just huge, very necessary. But how do you
Hmm.
do that at night? Because people do fall at night. And how do
Yep.
you do that when they're in a bathtub bathing? So there are, I don't
There's
want to say easy solution, but there are solutions that will cover some capacity of the problem. But I'm not sure if it covers the entire problem, right?
For sure. And I think, getting into the wearables, I worked with children's hospitals a lot in my previous role. And I listened to some of the feedback that they had that's not different from what we're talking about with elder care. Their biggest challenges a lot of the times is with the chronically and complex care that they have in their pediatric community, and the impact that that has on parents getting into work, being able, one of them having to stay overnight. And so I think when used appropriately, something like a camera that can be an oversight so a parent can get a good night's sleep, or any kind of a caregiver can get a good night's sleep, whether it's elder care or child care, those things can be helpful. Privacy is obviously a major concern. I also think, wearables are great. One of the things that I was mentioning, recently went to the American Telemedicine Association show and talked to a number of these wearable vendors. Give access to the caregiver. If they're a healthcare proxy, have the different apps have much better access for somebody like myself, who's the proxy for their parents, where I can log in and actually participate. Or if I see my parents aren't being compliant, how do I get involved? I know that there's ways to do it with certain vendors and with certain condition types, but how do we make that more accessible as well? So, and I
Yep.
think I see in the chat, JK Coughlin, you say it right perfectly. When we innovate, make sure we are including the caregiver and the care receiver and the potential solutions. I think, to her point, it happens in a vacuum a lot of times, and so we come out with these surface level problem solvers, which are important but not deep.
Right. I exactly. You describe it well. We need to solve the root of the problem, but not just on the surface type of solutions. And there's a lot of that. So I appreciate your comment, JK. Thank you. All right. So what are some of the most innovative ways that you've seen in caregiving that's done, whether technology or any kind of services that you see that's coming out?
Well, I mean, I think there's just the great services that are happening from home health, whether it's a home instead, an MCARA, or health dispatch. I think just those things happening routinely, predictably, that's really great for our society in terms of helping people get back to work, who need the respite. Those are great, and because human care is wonderful, and I think those are some of the easiest ways, or not easiest ways, but most wholesome ways to solve things like loneliness, and somewhat of keeping people independent, which I think is really important. Um, I do think that there is, in the tech space, like I mentioned, some work being done that's broader than the wearables. And I won't name specific companies, but I just think that any of the components that go past just the wearables on the wrist or the chest or things like that, that's getting into helping people move. And that's why I brought up something like robotics. I don't mean having like an R2D2 in a kitchen moving around. I mean, is there something that with oversight from another human that could help move, somebody in a wheelchair seamlessly into a bathtub, or like I mentioned, even just moving things around a house. I think that type of innovation is really exciting, personally. And I think that with the right reimbursement shifts, that some of these companies that are doing wearables will start to shift. And so if I look at something like a Best Buy Health, they already have wearables, et cetera, that are, that they have through their remote patient monitoring solutions. But I think what's exciting about what they're doing is that they also have social workers that are on call 24/7. So they have that opportunity to not only have the wearables, but then also the support with a human. That's the kind of combination that I would say that we need to start to see holistically in the market. Because I don't think one vendor can do it on their own. Because even like a Best Buy, like there might be something that needs more in-person care. So partnership is really important, and that's going to take shared royalties, shared interests,
Mm-hmm.
shared profits amongst a number of these different companies. So I think we'll start to see a lot of that forming in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Another area that I like to see is a way to lift a senior once they've fallen down instead of
Mm-hmm.
waiting for emergency to come, because falls is huge. It's a major problem for seniors. And too often when they've fallen, they're laying there for a long time before they can get help, lift. So I see, let's say grandma's fallen and grandpa can't lift grandma, and then they have to, lay there and wait for, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes for someone to come and help. So that's another area I think we need some innovation as well.
Agreed. And I think that is where some of these wearable companies can help, right? With the fall detection, I think we're seeing great strides in that area. And then to your point, how do we make things move faster and safer? Because falls is also one of the number one reasons why people move into, assisted
Hmm.
living, because they no longer can live on their own.
Right,
So
right.
I fully agree.
Hmm. Well, in closing, I know we cover a lot, many important topics. Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
No, I think just reading the chat, reflecting on our conversation, Han, I think the biggest thing that all of us can do, if you're on this call, you care about this topic. And I think the normalization of caregiving, seeking ways to improve the benefits packages at a number of different employers, but also don't just push it out and expect an employer to figure it out on their own. You have to be a part of the solution, especially if you want the solution to be maximized and really and truly a benefit. And then I think, if you are in a position of being a people leader, think outside the box. If we want to get away from this 9 to 5 beacon or beachhead, so to speak, then you be the one to say, it's okay, we can change this. We can
Hmm.
be milestone driven, be the voice of reason. And then also, I think, look out for folks that are in this caregiver environment. It's really hard. Check in on them, look out for each other. And then I think, Han, you and I both mentioned a plan. Whatever you can do as a family to come up with a plan, you might divert from it, and that's
Hmm.
okay. But starting with what your needs are, understanding what people want in end of life, understand everyone's financial circumstances, ask for help, join seminars. And then I think lastly, know your non-negotiables.
Hmm.
Um, really be clear on that, because it will make you happier.
Hmm. Absolutely. Boy, I echo that. Very much needed. And, you know, again, you're not alone. Reach out to folks that have gone through the journey, and there's a lot of resources nowadays as well. So thank you so much. And I want to thank J.K. Coughlin, Michael Mann, Patty Sharon, and let's see. Hey, Michael. And thank you so much, Tracy Chadwell. Again, we're learning from you folks, and I hope that you've gained some good insight from here. And let's everyone normalize this conversation and put it in the forefront. There's nothing to be ashamed of in making tough decisions in life, and you'll come to a time when you're going to be so happy that you made that decision. So, as you know, parenting is tough, and many parents don't mind the late nights or the early mornings. Work-family balance is a challenge, and parents are quitting their careers to provide unpaid childcare or unpaid daycare. Some families can do this, but most cannot. It's not a viable work-life balance solution. So instead, we must modify how we view work to promote flexibility. And young professionals, like we shared previously, they may defer childbearing for more flexible work schedules. It's not for everybody, but some are making those decisions. Changing our culture of overwork is the largest hurdle in work-life balance, in my opinion. So we need to value quality over quantity and prioritize our well-being over our productivity. I think only then we will be able to achieve real progress on this very important topic. And thank you so much for tuning in today. And also, please remember to check out our newly launched platform, Senior Care System. It's an all-in-one sales and marketing platform for individuals and businesses that provide care for the aging population. So again, thank you, and we'll see you again next week.